Hello teacher, hello students. Welcome to today's lesson on restrictions and modes of payment in foreign trade. As you remember, in the previous non-plasma lesson, you discussed the role and importance of trade in economic development. From the previous non-plasma lesson, you must have noted that domestic trade refers to pure exchange activities within a national boundary, whereas international trade can be defined as the exchange of goods and services among citizens of independent or sovereign countries. We also discussed absolute advantage and comparative advantage as two guiding principles that determine which commodities should be produced locally and which ones should be imported from abroad. Students, for your better understanding of the discussion in today's lesson, let me remind you some concepts related to foreign trade. Foreign trade refers to the exchange of goods and services among different countries that have different currencies, economic policies, levels of economic development, and so on. Exports and imports are the two important components of foreign trade. Value of trade and volume of trade are also two important terms, usually associated with foreign trade. Now, what I want you to do in the first activity is to differentiate between two terms that are related to the components of foreign trade. The two terms which I want you to differentiate are 1. Exports and imports, and 2. Trade and volume of trade. Do the activity in groups. I hope you've enjoyed your group discussions. Now, compare your answer with the one I'm going to give you in a moment. Exports are those goods and services that leave a country in the form of sales to abroad. On the other hand, imports are those goods and services that enter into a country in the form of purchases from abroad. Value of trade is the sum of the monetary value of all goods exported and imported in a given year. On the other hand, volume of trade is the sum of the physical quantities of all goods exported and imported in a given year. Students, with this conceptual background, let's start today's lesson. In today's lesson, we will focus on the restrictions and modes of payment in foreign trade. Let's first discuss restrictions on international trade. A trade restriction is an artificial restriction on the trade of goods and or services between two or more countries. Trade restrictions are protectionist policies intended primarily to protect domestic industries from foreign competition. Usually, restrictions are imposed on import trades. Governments use tariffs and non-tariff restrictions to limit the import of certain goods. As a result, the supply of imported goods in the domestic market will decrease. Ceteris paribus, a decrease in supply of imported goods leads to an increase in the price of the imported goods, which in turn leads to a lower demand for the goods. Consequently, the demand for domestically produced goods will increase. Students, import tariffs and non-tariff restrictions such as quotas and exchange controls are the 3 points that we are going to discuss under trade restrictions. An import tariff is a tax imposed on commodities that enter into a country from abroad. A tariff is collected by the federal government. Tariffs are also known as customs duties or import duties. Ceteris paribus, high tariffs raise the prices of imported goods. As a result, consumers shift their demand to domestically produced goods, and for this reason, the demand for imported goods decreases. Tariffs serve two general purposes. The primary purpose is to protect local producers by limiting imports, and the second one is to raise revenue. There are 3 forms of import tariffs. These are specific tariffs, ad valorem tariffs, and compounded tariffs. In the case of Ethiopia, the Ethiopian Revenue and Customs Authority, abbreviated as ERCA, has the authority to make importers discharge their tariff obligations. Students, did you know what specifically the 3 forms of tariffs refer to? Let's see each of them, namely specific tariff, ad valorem tariff, and compounded tariff in more detail. A specific tariff is a tax imposed on each unit of an imported product. It is based on physical quantities. This tax is the same on all products of the same kind. For example, a 3-birr tariff per 40-watt light bulb. An ad valorem tariff is a tax imposed on the basis of a percentage of the monetary value of the product. For instance, a 20% tariff on the monetary value of a set of electronic materials. If its monetary value is, say, 10 million birr, the tariff will be 2 million birr. Compounded tariff, or a two-part tariff, is a combination of both a specific and ad valorem tariffs. For instance, 100 birr per piece of DVD player and 40% on its value. Well, students, now let's also see the non-tariff restrictions, such as quotas and exchange controls. An import quota is a type of trade restriction that sets a physical limit on the quantity of a good that can be imported into a country in a given period of time. Quotas are among the oldest forms of trade restrictions, and also they have a strong effect in limiting volume of imports. As the quantity of importing the good is restricted, the price of the imported good increases. Thus, consumers opt to purchase more domestic products. The primary goal of import quotas is to reduce imports and increase domestic production of a good or service. Thus, protect domestic production by restricting foreign competition. Exchange controls are restrictions on the amount of a certain foreign currency that can be bought by importers. The government can limit the import of a certain good by restricting the amount of foreign currencies it allows to importers of the good. Alternatively, by intervening in the exchange rate market, the government may lower the value of or devaluate the domestic currency. In both cases, the volume of imports will be restricted. Before proceeding to the discussion of modes of payment, I want you to do the second activity individually. Why do governments choose quotas over tariffs, though a tariff has the added advantage of raising revenue? Students, did you answer the question? Very good. Let me give you the main reason. The main reason is related to the effectiveness of the trade restriction instruments. The major reason is that quotas allow a country to fix and decide on the quantity to be imported. They have relatively a strong effect in limiting volume of imports. On the other hand, a tariff adjusts the price, but leaves the post-tariff quantity to market forces. Sometimes the desired lower limit of imports may not be achieved. Therefore, tariff is less predictable and less precise than a quota. Well, students, let's now proceed to our discussion on modes of payment in international trade. You know that international or foreign trade involves exports and imports. Exports of goods give rise to receipts of foreign currencies to the exporting country, whereas imports lead to payments in foreign currency by the importing country. Such payments can be made in 3 different ways. The 3 modes of payments for imports are banker's transfer method, bill of exchange, or letter of credit method. Each of them is stated as follows. Banker's transfer is a method of transferring money from the bank account of the buyer or the importer in the importing country to the bank account of the seller or the exporter in the exporting country. Bill of exchange is a written order addressed by a creditor or a seller to a debtor or a buyer. It requires the debtor to pay a certain sum of money either on demand or at a fixed date in the future to the creditor. Upon receiving the bill, the debtor confirms his or her agreement by signing on it. Letter of credit is a letter addressed by a banker to an exporter, stating his or her agreement to make payments to the exporter against documents relating to the dispatch of goods. Letter of credit is the most common mode of payment for imports in Ethiopia. Students, before we finish the program, I want you to do one more activity on the trade restrictions based on the information I am going to give you. You will do the exercise in groups. hope you've suggested the best solution based on the current context of Ethiopia and the macroeconomic point of view. Well, let's now do it together. The government should impose relatively lower taxes on investment goods, because if investment goods are allowed to be imported at lower tariffs, investors will be encouraged by the lower cost of investment and are likely to invest more. Increase in investment in turn accelerates economic growth and creates employment opportunities. Students, let me summarize the main points of our discussion before we end today's lesson. In our lesson today, we have discussed the different types of trade restrictions, namely import tariffs, import quotas, and exchange controls. We have seen three modes of payments: banker's transfer, bill of exchange, and letter of credit. Well, students, with this we end today's lesson on restrictions and modes of payment in foreign trade. In our next lesson, we will discuss trade policies in Ethiopia. So until then, goodbye everyone.